Hey guys, what is going on? So I wanted to talk about compound lifts and their role in hypertrophy and why you may be doing some compound lifts thinking that they're going to get you really jacked in a certain body part and it's just not happening. And I kind of want to talk about how that's happened for me and how I've been able to kind of fix it, some methods that I'm currently using to fix that for myself, and some, alternate methods that you could use if, the compound lift that you're doing is just not cutting it for you. Okay. So I'll use myself as an example. So I have always been somebody who's done bench press. It is the first lift that I ever learned when I was 12 years old. I'm currently 26, so I've been doing it the majority of my life. And I also learned how to bench press with a narrow grip. And so that's always kind of how I've done it, is a close grip bench press, which is supposed to bias the triceps. So you would imagine that I would have a pretty juicy set of triceps now that I bench in the 400s, but that is not the case. Now, I have developed my triceps in recent years, but it has not been due to close grip bench. In fact, I've widened my grip a little bit more. And while I do still do some close grip bench, I think the majority of my tricep growth has been from doing other things. And so in my current training block, I'm implementing new strategies, and I have experimented with this kind of stuff in the past. And I want to talk about some methods that I can kind of use in terms of biasing the triceps more with compound lifts and with isolation lifts. But before I get into why I would do things a certain way, I want to talk about why I think my triceps didn't get developed. And I like to think of this in terms of a chain. Okay, so for me in particular, I always used to do these rotator cuff warm-up things. It's just something that our strength and conditioning coach had us do. And my shoulders were always very active. They always got really warmed up. I got a really good pump before I even did any lifts. And so when I would go and I would do the bench press, keep in mind I was always doing close grip bench, my shoulders would get absolutely lit up. They would get super pumped. They would get painful. My shoulders were basically doing all the work when I was doing bench press. So if you know about hypertrophy and what a lot of the research suggests, it's that when you come within, 1-2 reps, possibly even, going all the way to failure, that's going to be the best way to stimulate that muscle for hypertrophy. So if I am absolutely maxing out and going to failure for my shoulders when I'm doing bench press, that is an effective hypertrophy exercise for my shoulders. And, they're very active, and my shoulders are a prime mover in the bench press. Cool, my shoulders grow from the bench press. Now, it might not be the best possible shoulder exercise. There could be exercises that stimulate them even more, but in that example, that is an effective hypertrophy exercise. Now, my triceps might not have even come close to failure because they were not as active, right? And I'm not talking about you need to go and do all these shoulder activation. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying whatever muscle group that you have that dominates, that's going to be the one that does a lot of the work. So even after I left and I stopped doing all this shoulder exercise, my shoulders were still very overactive when I bench press. So it wasn't a matter of me doing warm-ups or not, but I do think that consistently doing the warm-ups caused me to have that mind-muscle connection and have overactive shoulders. So anyway, if I'm taking my shoulders to an RP 10 with the bench press, but I'm only taking my triceps to like an RP 5 because they're just not getting properly stimulated from that bench press, well, it's not really an effective tricep hypertrophy exercise, is it? And, maybe my chest is getting an RP 7 or 8 or something like that, but realistically, that's doing more for my shoulders than anything else. And so I can still get stronger shoulders and get stronger and bigger chest, and I can grow those muscle groups. And I can still get a strength stimulus from going at RP5 or RP6 or whatever I got with my triceps. I can still get stronger triceps, but they're not going to be growing, at least not at the rate that you would expect those other muscles to grow. So even though I was trying to bias the triceps by doing a close grip bench, it wasn't really working out. Okay, so that is basically how you're able to build size and strength in certain prime movers and not in others. And then that lift still goes up, but the muscle group that you're trying to target doesn't. And as your shoulders and your pecs or whatever muscles are overtaking the muscle that you're trying to do, that disparity is going to grow more and more. And it's going to get to the point where your triceps are not even in the realm of coming close to failure because they're so weak relative to these other muscles that continue to grow and continue to do all the work. That's just going to get worse and worse. Okay. So this is not talking about muscle imbalances and how they're super bad and it's going to cause you to get injured or anything like that. It's just saying that if you are not utilizing your triceps, bringing them within close proximity to failure, if you continue down this path, you're just going to say, hey, my triceps don't get stimulated from bench press. Now, it may not be triceps. Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it's your chest. Maybe your chest doesn't really get much out of anything out of bench press because your other prime movers do all the work. Or maybe it's in squats. Maybe your quads don't really get a lot of stimulus out of squatting. And for other people, they absolutely explode their quads. Okay, so it can be any lift. But the way that I like to think about it is that, you have that chain, and the strong link in the chain is actually the limiting factor from the perspective of bringing up the other muscle groups. Because as that strong link in the chain continues to bear the brunt of, the entire exercise, the rest of the chain isn't able to catch up, or at least you're not really stimulating the muscle groups that you want to. Okay, so one way to fix this is, obviously doing close grip bench press is going to bias the triceps a little bit more, but when that's not sufficient, you need to do other things. So another thing to do is obviously just do isolation tricep exercises and bring them within failure. And overnight, you're not just going to get massive triceps and then they're going to be able to overcome the imbalances that you've had over the years and have consistently, done. It's going to take some time to build up that size to bring your triceps, up to pace with your other muscle groups. So you might do this for a year or two and it might not really allow you to have that same stimulus, that you would otherwise get if you didn't have that imbalance. So you can do that. You can build muscle that way and slowly wait for that muscle to grow so that they, get up to par with the rest of your prime movers. Another thing that you can do is actually do a pre-exhaust method. So you could do a tricep exercise where you exhaust your triceps and then you go into close grip bench press, and now your triceps are going to be the limiting factor because you didn't fatigue your shoulders, you didn't fatigue your chest, you only fatigue your triceps, and now your triceps are getting very stimulated. And now what would have been RP5 or RP6 with a close grip bench could now get moved into RP9 or RP10. It might be the limiting factor in actually being able to finish that bench press rep. All of a sudden, now you have the ability to use a compound lift and use very heavy weight and have that limiting factor be your triceps. And therefore it's going to be within, a couple of reps of failure. You're going to get, that actual hypertrophy stimulus for your triceps, and you're going to be able to bring them up. And then boom, eventually you're probably going to get to the point where you can just do a normal close grip bench and it's going to be your triceps that do most of the work, as it should have been from the beginning. And then eventually your triceps are going to get so stimulated from close grip bench as you continue to do that you're going to be able to move your grip out further and further. And eventually your triceps are going to be very active and get a potent stimulus from just standard bench press. So I like to think about it in kind of a spectrum in that way. So you can either do the pre-fatigue method. You can do just simply doing tricep isolations there. You can do, obviously, a close grip bench press is going to bias the triceps to a certain degree. You could do this with squats, right? Maybe you think that a high bar squat is going to bias your quads enough where that's going to be the limiting factor, but that might not be the case. I know for me, I always used to squat high bar, and my glutes and my hamstrings were always what got really sore. That did all the work. That's what grew. And so maybe doing front squats is the way to go. Or maybe you want to do leg extensions prior to your high bar squats. Or maybe if you really want to go hard, you can do leg extensions prior to your front squats. And then your quads will be screaming when you do the front squats, and then you will get a hypertrophy stimulus. So I like to think about it in that way, as opposed to just being like, hey, grow your legs by squatting, or, oh, I'm going to bench press and my chest is going to grow. Because funny enough, I had a similar experience with bench press actually. And I grew my chest, and then now my chest gets adequately stimulated from bench press, and I don't have to do specific chest exercises, or I don't have to pre-fatigue my chest, and therefore I get adequate stimulus there. This can also mean, for example, whatever muscle group that you have, let's say your glutes take over on your squat, try not doing any glute isolation exercises. Let your glutes kind of fall behind go to maintenance volume, only get stimulus, from the compounds that you can't control. Obviously your glutes are going to be active during a squat anyway, but don't do specific glute exercises. Try and, have your glutes, sure, they can still stay strong, but try and bring your quads up, in that example. Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe your quads are overactive, and then you start doing low bar squats. And maybe low bar squats, still your quads are too overactive. So maybe you do some, some hip thrusts, and you do some glute bridges before you squat, and then you do a low bar squat, and then your glutes come up to par, with your quads. So just think of it in that perspective. Do specific isolation lifts where you're actually coming within proximity of failure. Make sure that the muscle group that you're trying to train is the one that's getting stimulated. That's going to allow it to grow. And then you can do that pre-exhaust method as well. And that's going to allow that muscle group to actually get stimulated. And that is currently what I'm doing in my training. I'm trying to bring my triceps up. I'm doing some, band tricep work before. And then I'm really, obviously I'm still doing close grip bench press, trying to bias my triceps, as well as doing actual, hypertrophy stimulating accessories on top of that. So eventually my triceps will get to the point where they can actually get properly stimulated from a close grip bench. Then I won't need to do all that other stuff. And then hopefully they get to the point where they actually dominate the lift. And then I'll have a whole new set of problems. Okay. So anyway, that's all I got to say about that. I'll keep you updated, and I'll talk to you soon.